Everyone, welcome to Cinema Safari. Today we have a big episode. We are celebrating 90 years of DC Comics. So DC Comics is one of the biggest comic book publishers, pretty much rivaling Marvel Comics as the two big comic book publishers. And a lot of history going back 90 years. So I'm excited to get right in. We have a lot to talk about, a lot of history to cover with DC. So stick around and join us as we talk about 90 years of DC. So DC Comics is currently owned by Warner Bros. Discovery. It stands for Detective Comics, and it was the first series was published in 1937. So DC Comics is one of the largest and oldest American comic book companies. First comic book company or first comic under the DC banner was published in 1937. A lot of the stories are set in the fictional DC universe, feature numerous culturally iconic hero characters such as Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, The Flash, who make up the Justice League, along with like Aquaman, characters like that. Well-known characters that a lot of people know that are very popular, very well-known in pop culture over the years. So as many people know, there's different eras to comics. So you have the Golden Era, the Silver Age, the Bronze Age, and the Modern Age, which we're basically in right now. So DC Comics, so the Golden Age of comic books, if you're looking at it from the DC side of it, that was comic books ranging from 1938 to 1956. During this time, modern comic books were first published around this time and were rapidly increasing in popularity around this time. And the superhero archetype was created during this age, during these years, and many well-known characters were introduced for the first time to the public, such as Superman, Batman, Robin, Captain Marvel, Captain America, Wonder Woman, although Captain America has become a well-known character in Marvel over the years. But those characters were some of the very first characters that were created for superhero type comic books. An event that kind of marks the beginning of the Golden Age for many was in the 1938 debut of Superman in Action Comics #1, published by Detective Comics. And his popularity helped make comic books a very major arm of publishing. And that led to new companies creating superheroes of their own to emulate Superman's success. So we started to see some smaller companies during this golden age create, superheroes. So DC kind of launched the popularity of superheroes in the beginning and kind of led to other companies creating their own heroes, kind of emulating the success DC had right off the bat in the Golden Age. So DC was kind of like the Kickstarter for a lot of these superheroes that some are still around today. Some of the pioneers of DC Comics who started in the 1930s, we have Malcolm Miller Nicholson, who was the founder of DC Comics, Jerry Siegel, Joe Shuster. They are the creators of some very well-known characters. They created Superman, Lois Lane, along with being involved with some others as well. Bob Kane, Bill Finger, creators of Batman, the Joker, and some of the other Batman characters as well. And the four of them really were pioneers of the of comic books for superheroes. Going with DC. Then you have Sheldon Mayer, who was one of the early founders of DC. Also Gardner Fox, who created various characters within the superhero comic books during the Golden Age. So those are some of the founders of and pioneers of DC Comics who started with the beginning of the company, started to really help it grow in popularity during this time. Then you jump to the Silver Age of the comic books, which began with the publication of DC Comics Showcase number 4 in October of 1956. And this introduced the modern Flash, like Barry Allen, and some other characters that are kind of more modernized that we know today. Like the Golden Age focused on some older versions of the characters like Jay Garrick's Flash, some other like Justice Society members who were kind of introduced during that time. Moving into the Silver Age, we see some of those modern versions of the characters that we kind of know more today as that main version, like having Barry Allen as Flash, or even now having Wally West as Flash. He wasn't introduced yet. So then the Silver Age of comic books was a period of artistic advancement and widespread commercial success in mainstream American comic books. Very big time featuring the superhero archetype, following the Golden Age of comic books. It's considered to cover from 1956 to 1970, and the popularity of comic books about superheroes, it was declining during this time, following World War II. So a lot of comic books, like about horror, crime, romance, they took a larger presence in the comic book market at this time. And so there's a lot of controversy that arose over comic books covering the superhero archetype or this kind of archetype, leading to like juvenile delinquency, crime, real life crime, stuff like that. So in 1954, publishers implemented the Comics Code Authority to regulate comic content. And in the wake of these changes, publishers began introducing superhero stories again, and a change that was introduced with a new version of these comics, like The Flash. In response to strong demand, DC began publishing more superhero titles, including Justice League of America, and this prompted Marvel Comics to actually follow suit, and they began with creating the Fantastic Four, which we all know as Marvel's first family. So in this age of comic books, we start to see team up heroes, a very big shift from the Golden Age, and definitely a big time in comic book history where we kind of see a big shift, a lot of questionable about where we're at based on events that were going on in the real world and how that kind of affected comic books and vice versa. So then we have the Bronze Age of comic books, which covers the period of 1970 to 1985. And in this age, it retained many of the conventions of the Silver Age, with traditional superhero titles remaining the mainstay of the industry. However, there was a return of darker plot elements and storylines more related to relevant social issues that were going on during this time period in the world. So in this time period, going back to the Silver Age, a lot of events in the world, so we didn't really, comic books kind of shifted to like lighter tones to try to balance that out. In this era, we kind of see some of those darker tones coming back that may have been introduced a little during the Golden Age. And then in the modern age, it's also called referred to as the Dark Age of comic books due to the popularity and artistic influence of titles with more serious content, such as The Dark Knight Returns, Batman, and The Watchmen, which are two of the two very well known comic books arcs that people know even to this day, especially The Dark Knight Returns, where we see an older version of Bruce Wayne who comes out of retirement to don the Batman persona again to deal with some issues that are going on. And it also was developed into a two-part animated film, maybe, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. Um, so very acclaimed story. Both of these, Watchmen as well, which has been adapted into several other media, a movie and a short-lived HBO series a few years ago. But both of these were very instrumental in the development of DC Comics, especially in this time. Then in the late 70s, during this Bronze Age, we do see a lot of rise independent publishers who start to create their own superheroes as well. We see a rise in that. And some of these people came from like DC, Marvel to kind of kickstart their own independent publishers, join these independent publishers to kind of try to build on the success that DC and Marvel had and try to create characters of their own to try to get that going. So we definitely see a rise in independent publishers during this time, um, creating their own stories as well. And this time we also see the rise of anti-heroes. So in DC specifically, we see Batman the Dark Knight Rises as a limited series, the Watchmen, anti-heroes. Um, DC also, we see a lot more mature titles like John Constantine, Hellblazer, Swamp Thing, Lobo, and um, with John Constantine, it's very violent, cynical. Lobo is well known for like its graphic violence and adult content that differentiated from other mainstream stream titles that DC published both during this time and in the past. We didn't really see a lot of like this kind of violence as much prior to this, so this was really kind of a shift. This era of comics definitely was a very big shift from what we've seen before and kind of slowly developing into more of what we know today in some aspects. Um, so yeah, definitely a big shift in that sense and a lot more violent tones during this Bronze Age than we were used to. So in DC, coming into the more like modern age that we're currently in, so DC Entertainment in 2011, they rebooted all of their titles following the Flashpoint storyline, which is a big storyline that kind of, in a lot of ways, kind of reset the DC universe. And a reboot, the New 52, gave new origin stories and costume designs to a very, very big amount of its DC characters. So also we have, so that's kind of some of the history of DC Comics, going back to the golden age in the 30s to present day DC Comics. So for me, some of my favorite storylines in DC Comics, Flashpoint dealing with the multiverse has, we get to see a lot of the multiverse and kind of like, I don't know if it was the first introduction of the multiverse, but kind of that idea that there are heroes different versions of these characters that we have come to know and love, and getting to see different versions of them interact with each other and how they differentiate, how they're similar, different, their qualities. It was a very interesting concept and something that was a lot of fun, I thought. And so, yeah, Flashpoint, I think, is on the DC side, definitely one of my favorite storylines and something I really liked. They did the Flashpoint in the Flash show with Grant Gustin, for those that know it. And, I think like when that episode came out, a lot of people, I think at that time, wanted it to span multiple episodes, kind of have more of a, them to kind of expand on the concept of Flashpoint. But it was pretty short lived in the show, which was a little disappointing. But yeah, I'm still a very big fan of the show, even though it ended. Definitely one of my favorite, if not favorite, shows of all time. I really love the Flash show. I also really like Superman, I think 75, because that was the first time in DC Comics that we saw a hero die. Very big event, very big comic that we saw because, and then having Superman come back to life, because especially Superman, having a hero die in general in a comic book, I don't expect that. But like Superman, who's Superman, basically invincible, having him die, that was definitely a big, big thing, and something that was pretty cool in a sense, because having someone who's that iconic and showing that he's not truly invincible. It definitely had a big impact, and it was a very very impactful story, I think, and that's part of the reason why I liked it so much. So, as one of my favorite characters in comics, both DC, Marvel, definitely Dick Grayson. Um, One of my favorite. I don't know what it is about Dick Grayson specifically, or why I like him so much. A lot of people do. I know Dick Grayson, the character, is one of the top ranked comic characters of all time. Um, Very popular. So I don't know why I specifically like him so much, but I do. And one of my favorite comic storylines of all time, definitely Nightwing. I think Year One it's called, because we get to see in that storyline Dick Grayson transitioning to Nightwing, kind of starting out on his own after his time as Robin, kind of shadowing Batman. So in Nightwing Year One, we get to see him kind of find his own way in the world, as his own hero, but building his own, starting to build his own like rogues gallery. So yeah, I definitely Nightwing Year One is definitely one of my favorite arcs in comic book runs in out of DC and Marvel. Definitely one of my favorites. Yeah, but Dick Grayson's definitely probably my favorite character in comic books. I really like him. Especially his transition from Nightwing to or Robin to Nightwing. Is definitely one of, I think, the best arcs out there. So going forward in DC, we have, there's a lot to talk about. There's, the future of DC Comics. There's going to be there's a lot of stuff in the works, especially with James Gunn's vision for the DC universe. He has a very cohesive tonal direction for not only the films, but there's also going to be tie-in comics specifically set for like his DC universe. But then on the DC Comics side of things, there's also reinventions and stuff going on. with that. So definitely excited to see all that, and I'm looking forward to that. So with the DC Universe, we are getting Supergirl later this year in June, then Clayface in October. Man of Tomorrow was fast tracked for release next July 2027, which is a sequel to Superman. Um, then we also have in development Authority, Brave and Bold, Swamp Thing, an untitled Wonder Woman film are all in development. But James Gunn did say there aren't going to be any updates on the Brave and the Bold until the Batman Part 2 is released, I believe, next year. So we're not really going to get any updates on that for at least a year. Yeah, but a lot of people, I think, are excited for some of these upcoming films. A lot of people are interested to see who's going to play Batman. There's been a lot of fan castings, a lot of talk about that, and Thor is unfortunately probably not going to get any updates on that for a while. So those are some of the updates, some of the future that we're going for in DC, and I'm excited for all of it. I'm looking forward to it. I think James Gunn has a good vision for this universe that he's starting to create. All the projects he's done so far, starting with Creature Commandos, the Superman movie, Peacemaker season 2, very good. A lot of hype for Lanterns. So everything he's put out so far, I think, has been getting a lot of good press, a lot of positive reviews. So I'm excited to see what he continues to build and grow with this new DC universe that he's creating, and I'm looking forward to all of it. So with that, we are going to wrap up today's episode. So DC, there's a lot going on. A lot has happened over 90 years with comics. DC was kind of the pioneer of comics, of superhero comics, starting in the 30s. With a lot of these characters. And also, I will say there is a very different, like DC and then Marvel, there is a very, they definitely differentiate in the way that they approach superheroes. Like there are a lot of similarities with heroes that were created in Marvel. Like the comparison that people always do is like Batman and Tony Stark. Both are regular humans that use both like rich guys who create gadgets, weapons to fight crime and protect the world. But there's always a very big comparison between those two. I think when you're comparing DC to Marvel, and there's others as well, but I think those two are definitely big ones as well. Yeah, but the way they approach it, like Marvel or like DC approaches like superheroes, there's heroes, sidekicks in a lot of the stories, and then they, in certain like arcs, you have the Justice League, Teen Titans, Young Justice, stuff like that. And then Marvel, you have like the Avengers, the X-Men. But where they differentiate, Marvel doesn't really have those like heroes, sidekicks as much. Like you might have like Hawkeye, Kate Bishop, who kind of work together sometimes, but you don't really see that like emphasis on the heroes and sidekicks as much in the Marvel universe, which is something that I think is interesting about DC Comics when you're comparing the two, because having that like mentor apprentice type of relationship between a lot of characters in DC Comics, like Batman, Robin, Aquaman, Aqualad, Wonder Woman, Wonder Girl, Green Arrow, Speedy, Red Arrow, Arsenal. Having those relationships, I think, it creates like a big impact with those characters. And then as those, sidekicks start to get older, get more knowledge, start to go out on their own, sometimes it's a smooth transition, sometimes it creates tension between the two. So it definitely, I think, adds something to that relationship, to the story between those characters, which is something I think is interesting that DC does compared to Marvel. And I wouldn't say necessarily which one I prefer, because like there's certain arcs in DC that I do really like, and then certain arcs in Marvel that I also really like. So personally, I don't know which one's necessarily better, so to speak, but like there's definitely, I think, interesting how each one kind of approaches certain things, certain characters, certain arcs. Um, they kind of have their own style, their own spin on things. So like I don't know which one's necessarily better. And I don't know if like there is like a better way necessarily that either one is approachable, but just it has their own feel. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. So that's kind of interesting. So I'd like to hear what you think about which arc you really enjoy over the 90 years of DC Comics. What's your favorite arc, favorite era even, your favorite character, how DC has impacted you over the years, anything like that. So comment below with any of that. Like, subscribe to the channel if you're not already. Follow us on social media for any updates on future episodes. And as always, thank you for your support. Thank you for watching today's episode. Hope you enjoyed it. And we will see you next time.